The Brothers Karamazov, Book 3, Chapter 6. Again, a review of the setting to help catch the overall 14,000-foot view of the novel. Again, Book 1, the history of the main players, the literal brothers Karamazov, along with Fyodor, Zosima, and the brothers Karamazov's mothers. Book 2 took place primarily at the monastery, chapters 1 and 2 arriving at the monastery and arriving at Father Zosima's cell. Chapters 3 and 4 of Book 2 taking place just outside Zosima's cell in the courtyard talking to the women. Chapters 5 and 6 of Book 2 back in Zosima's cell debating Ivan's article. And finally, Chapter 7 of Book 2, the horrible scene at the Father Superior's lunchroom. Book 3 moved us outside of the monastery, past history, to the present, and to the town, is where Book 3 takes place. Chapters 1 and 2 of Book 3 were centered around Fyodor's household and the servants' quarter behind it. And then chapters 3, 4, and 5 were a back alley, both figuratively and literally, a back alley conversation between Dmitri and Alyosha. Now, in this 6th chapter of Book 3, we go back to the first 2 chapters in Book 3, back to Fyodor's house. So now that we've gotten an overview and who sleeps where, the rats, Ivan and Fyodor in the main house, Grigory, Marfa, and Smerdyakov in the servants' quarters. Now we go into Fyodor's house here at the beginning of chapter 6, and we see his decorations, and he sort of has the exact kind of house that you would picture an old bachelor, an old mean widower to have. Sitting at the house, there are 4 characters that Alyosha walks into. You have Ivan and Fyodor both drinking the appropriate beverage for their character. Fyodor with his brandy after dinner, and Ivan, a younger intellectual, of course, is having his coffee. And then the servants' side of the house, Smerdyakov and Grigory. So Alyosha walks in and will take a coffee, and we learn the first interesting thing about Smerdyakov. He's the one that made the coffee, and he's quite a barista. Then we start to learn about actually important things. So immediately, as we're now learning about our 4th brothers Karamazov, and maybe this one isn't exactly on the level with Dmitri, Ivan, and Alyosha, he's still a brothers K. And so what do we learn about him? Well, he, even though he's in the servant class, he's stuck up, self-centered, rude, mean, doesn't like people, doesn't want people to like him, uninteresting, uninterested, standoffish, rude, with a superiority complex. In his childhood, he enjoyed killing cats and hanging them, and then performing fake religious services, pretending he was some sort of priest presiding over the funeral of the cats, assuming that he's mocking priesthood and mocking religious ceremony. So not a big winner so far. You know, that's great that you can make a good cup of coffee, and I love a guy who can make a good cup of coffee, but kind of a jerk, not a good bedside manner, not much people skills, and like a serial killer, grew up killing cats and then mocking religion to bury those cats properly. Well, Grigory, we know, was a devout man who raised in the faith. Dmitri, Ivan, and Alyosha at least tried to do the right thing about those boys. And remember from previous chapters that Grigory is a student of the book of Job, of the lives of the saints, and even some theologians he can't understand. And Grigory tries his best as a common person to be a real student of the scriptures, a student of church history, and a student of theology, and he is devout. And so he sees Smerdyakov as his gift from God, and he's going to raise him in the faith. And he sees Smerdyakov's cat killing and his bad attitude, so he's going to learn him some scriptures. And so what does Smerdyakov do? He looks at the Genesis 1 account, and he sees day 1, God said, "Let there be light." And day 4, God said, "Let there be a ruler of the day and a ruler of the night." And Smerdyakov laughs and laughs because he's only heard the fundamentalist interpretation of Genesis 1, and so he laughs because 3 24-hour periods have elapsed before God has created the sun, and we only measure 24-hour periods by the sun, so the creation account is a hilarious joke. And so he is, again, I think what Dostoevsky is doing is he's using a child of the servant class to be a rationalist. He's an angry person, he's a cat-killing person, and he's a rationalist. He is a mocker of religion. He mocks priest burials, and he mocks the Holy Scriptures themselves. And so Smerdyakov is another approachable, accessible way to get to the book's main themes that we haven't gotten to yet. That is the intellectual and moral struggle within Ivan and Alyosha and between Ivan and Alyosha. That's the main event, but we get these little visions, these little nuggets, these little appetizers, this little preview of coming attractions through characters, through caricatures, through cartoonish versions of both Christianity and rationalism. And Smerdyakov is he's a very poor man's, literally a poor man's Ivan, making antichrist arguments. And how does it turn out? Well, he's a mean person. However, he's also pitiful. Why is he pitiful? Because like our author, he struggled with epilepsy and with seizures, and strangely, perhaps paradoxically, judging by what we know of Fyodor so far and what we'll know about Fyodor in the whole course of this novel, is that he completely ignored his bastard son, smelly Smerdyakov, up until this point. When he's just a cat-killing antichrist, Fyodor, would give him treats, but largely just ignored him, didn't think much about him, just like is said about his other 3 sons. He just sort of forgot that they existed. However, when he has these epileptic seizures, all of a sudden Fyodor cares about him and cares about how Grigory disciplines him. And so all of a sudden, Fyodor is this left-wing peace and love hippie, and he doesn't want Grigory to physically discipline. He doesn't want corporal punishment on Smerdyakov anymore. So in a surprising move, Fyodor cares about Smerdyakov after he learns that he's epileptic. Then, as an example of Fyodor caring, he sees Smerdyakov looking through his books, and he chooses a famous Russian author. He chooses a book by Gogol, who is known to write stories that have hilarious characters or hilarious worlds or hilarious twist. And he gives him stories by Gogol, and basically I think what's going on here is Dostoevsky saying basically the normal average Russian finds Gogol, at the very least, in a superficial reading of Gogol, he's at least funny and entertaining. And a normal, nice Russian man would read Gogol and be enthralled and entertained and like his little stories about noses and overcoats. But instead, mean old Smerdyakov, old cat-killing Smerdyakov, he says he doesn't like him and he's not funny, and he doesn't like any of the books on Fyodor's shelf. So, matching with his unlikable personality, his bad taste in reading, and his antichrist theology, perhaps his greatest sin are his table manners. Remember, he's of the servant class. and yet he looks at his food like he runs a food blog, like he's some vlogger who only eats at Michelin 4-star rated Michelin restaurants. He holds up all of the food to eye level to see if it's worthy of going in his mouth. And so, all in all, this is just an annoying person with annoying habits. But Fyodor, now interested in him because he's epileptic, sees that he's interested in food, sees what a great barista he is, how he can brew a great cup of coffee, and how well he can make fish sticks and fish soup and other kinds of soup. Fyodor, almost like a good father would, sees what Smerdyakov is good at and interested in, and pushes him in that direction and says, "Oh, you like cooking? You like being a baker? I'll send you to Moscow and you can become a chef." Well, you can take the loser out of this village and send him to Moscow. But you can't take the loser out of the loser. And so Smerdyakov, it doesn't matter whether he's in Moscow or whether he's in this little town, he takes no interest in any high culture, popular culture, or the city life of Moscow. He's the same self-centered jerk in both places. And he comes back and he looks aged and he looks a little bit better kempt. He learns some metrosexuality there. He learned how to take care of himself and groom there, but not much else. So pretty unlikable guy. But on the good note, besides the coffee making note, there's also a moral center to him, at least in one way, that may seem to be an important fact to think about later on in the novel, and that is this. He's honest and he's trustworthy when it comes to money. One day, Fyodor accidentally left 300 rubles out, and Smerdyakov could have taken it, and nobody would have been the wiser, but he didn't do that, and he returned it to Fyodor, and Fyodor much appreciated that Smerdyakov is this trustworthy guy. This chapter, and there will be more where we'll get to know Smerdyakov, the next three, will continue to tell us more about his character. But this chapter ends with giving us one more of his one final personality quirk of Smerdyakov, and that is he is contemplative. He is lost in thought. And so this, again, is Dostoevsky giving us a miniature version of what is opposed to an existential Christian way of being. Zosima wants Alyosha to leave the monastery. Why? To go out in the world and do, to love, to serve, to exercise, to practice Christ-like love. And then all of the intellectual things follow once you're on the right, once you do Christ love, then the words and the works of Christ start to make sense. And this is always contrasted with Ivan's wanting to understand and philosophize and rationalize his way into the Christian faith. And Smerdyakov is described as a contemplative, one who is just lost in his self, one who is lost in his thoughts, one who is swirling around in his mind a world that is not the world everyone else is living in. And so always we're looking at these characters contrasting the contemplative versus the Christian, the rational versus the religious. Smerdyakov has natural abilities, and yet they're squandered because of his contemplative, Christ-hating, and therefore others-hating way of life that he is engaged in.